Hey, welcome guys back to the channel. Maverick here, bringing to you episode 11 of Fire Force. So, last episode we learned a little bit more about the world in general, as well as all the different special fire forces, right? We got to see all the commanders of Company 1 through 8, and, well, quite an interesting bunch, aren't they? I had a whole section from last episode talking about their namings, and talking a little bit about the world as it is right now shown in the anime, right? But I don't think we're going to get into that so fast because we are currently still dealing with the, I believe they're being labeled the white coats, white robes, something like that, some sort of extremist organization, of which apparently Shinra's brother is a part of. Not really sure how they're going to go from here. I presume that since they're starting their other investigations now, they're not going to be focusing on going to all the different companies, and instead, perhaps going back and finding some, all new leads, right? This is, I assume, going to be a completely new arc here. So, let's get into the episode and see what we're up for. Alright, let's begin in 3, 2, 1, play. Not a white clad. Oh. So that's history. Oh, are they gonna be talking about the history of the 8th? Hmm. They said that they were, branched off from actual firefighters, right? Like conventional firefighting. Solier 195. Shit, what's the Solier right now? Emmett, I'm gonna have to go look it up again. I don't know what the current Solier for this is. Oh, is this the lieutenant? Alright. And back. That's... Hmm. Oh, they already knew of each other before. A general's daughter. Huh. Oh, wait. So they were originally soldiers? Hmm. Hmm. An atheist. It seems that being an atheist in this world, though, is a lot, probably, is a lot more stigmatized than it is in our world. Hmm. Oh. Damn. And they were completely prepared for this as well? Hmm. Hmm. And so that's what compelled him to join the Special Fire Forces instead? Hmm. Okay. A point system. Hmm. Okay. So yeah, so Obi himself was a firefighter, and it was especially the 8th was established as part of a spin-off of normal firefighters. But guys such as the lieutenant came uh, and joined him, even though he's from the army. Hmm. That's nice. We get to see some history this time. Okay, I am intrigued. I like this. Hmm. Hmm. Dang. Why is it that some infernals, you know, just go crazy all of a sudden, and some can be like this guy? I mean, this is the second and third time we've seen this before. About I'm doing this along. Laton. I I can't help but to think that this is still like they just leave that guy there and they're not afraid that his situation is gonna turn for the worst or anything. Like even if there is an order of precedence between infernals that are dangerous at that point and not, you'd think that they'd still want to post someone as a guard or something, right? Okay. 2 years later. Huh. No, that's that would be Maki, right? Hmm. Now, I guess this is quite different when you consider firefighters are all about saving lives. Oh, and his sister already joined? Hmm. Okay. I believe, sorry, one of you guys last episode said, I would assume this is the Asakusa arc, probably. Ah, and this is the guy who... Right, the captain who was probably formerly a citizen of Japan. Ignored. But I can tell that he's probably very well liked and respected by the people here. Third generation. Ikishi. It's making fire disappear. Hmm? This dude. Settle it the old-fashioned way. Shin is just going around trying to challenge all the captains. Alright. They're really going full. I love this. Completely traditional oriented and themed. Whoa. Yeah, what? What? Isn't that a little bit overkill? Like, look, dude, you are cool as heck, but... I guess the words collateral damage doesn't exist in his dictionary. What the? But was that necessary though? Ooh. Okay. No wonder he can be one of the strongest. compound fire soldier. You did that though! Like... I still don't understand this. Why does he... Yes, yes it did. Okay. But why though? And they're still here? I don't know. Hmm. Well, at least we got to see something cool, right? Alright. I'll see you guys after the ending. Alrighty, so first of all, I gotta say, this has probably been one of my favorite episodes of Fire Force thus far into the series. I like how it has a lot of things within it, right? It's got character development, it's got cool moves, you know, cool fighting and whatnot, which is a big part of the draw of this anime in the first place. It had great pacing, and it also managed to have a central theme throughout the entire episode that was brought to the forefront in different kind of ways, and they sort of reinforced with each other, right? So I'll talk a little bit more on this after I go through the, you know, everything. But first of all, I guess we can divide it into two parts, right? The part with the 8th's history, and then the part with the 7th. Now, in terms of the 8th history, so actually, I was a little bit surprised there in regards to the lieutenants and Maki's army background, but in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have been. They actually did say this sometime in the first or second episode whilst they were doing a quick introduction of them. Just kind of slipped my mind, and also because later on, we know that the 8th was established by the actual firefighting agency, right? So I just kind of, you know, figured that they would probably follow that kind of lineage. I wonder if that's, you know, the identities of particularly Maki in particular is going to play a major role in the future, considering she is the daughter of a general, right? So, yeah, not really much else to talk about there. We got character development for the lieutenant as well, how, you know, sort of like a self-discovery process, eventually leading him to quit the army and instead join the Special Fire Forces, right? So, cool stuff over there. I actually thought they were going to stretch the story out to an entire episode, like maybe talk a little bit more about all this establishment, and for instance, the first time that they fought in actual Inferno, like how did they fight against his, how did the sister join, stuff like that. But I guess, learning more about the 7th is cool as well. And so let's talk a little bit about the 7th here, right? So when the captain of the 7th, Benimaru, showed up last episode, I was thinking, okay, these guys are definitely sort of like Edo period samurai archetypes, right? The way that they dress and whatnot, it screams that kind of era, right? And so indeed, in this episode, we do see that they're entirely, playing on that type of era and that type of culture. And it makes sense, right? And Asakusa, which is where they're based in, it's also one of the places within real-life Tokyo which still has a very big traditional presence there. It keeps a lot of the traditional features, traditional housing, traditional traditions, like stuff in regards to temples and whatnot, and food and whatnot. It's a major tourist attraction area as well. I've visited there quite a few times, and so it's basically, even though there's a lot of tourists there, right? When you walk into some of the main streets there, you can feel like you're being transported back to, I don't know, what is it, 17th, 18th century Japan, if you will. So yeah, and so they basically do have a huge Edo period influence onto them. And more specifically, they are completely referencing the Hikeshi, which is basically the firefighting forces of Tokyo that was established during the Edo period and eventually dissolved with the Meiji Restoration, right, where everything got modernized. So let's talk a little bit more about the Hikeshi, right? So the kanji for them basically literally means eliminate fire. So firefighting, eliminate fire, you get the drift. And actually, they are organized a lot like how we see the eight fire force companies here as well. So they each have their own little district and whatnot. And indeed, they kind of battle over the turf, over who, their own territory and who they're actually supposed to protect, and if this fire falls under my jurisdiction or yours, right? So they basically do they play on that entire thing, and indeed they even use some of the more traditional items and methods here. So by items I mean, for instance, we saw the matoi, which is that broom looking thingy which Benimaru sort of played around with and showed off his abilities with, right? So those things are basically the flags of the various different groups, I guess you could say, the firefighting groups of that time of the different Hikeshi, because they were each organized into their own individual groups with their own people, their own organization, and of course their own banners, right? And so the Matoi was basically sort of like the banner or flag of each different group, and also serving as a morale raiser as well. And so it's referencing that there. And then also the interesting thing about, why Benimaru used that kind of over-the-top method in order to kill the Inferno, right? So that actually goes back into the sort of firefighting techniques that the Hikeshi used in the past. So what he was doing there is basically the concept of Hakai Shoka, which is, most simply speaking, just simply destroying the area around the fire so that the fire has nothing to burn, right? So like in modern day forest fires, we do something similar as well. When we see that a forest has, like for instance in the States, in the western area, there are tons of forest fires that happen every single year, right? And what typically happens is, so because it's a forest, right, there's flammable stuff everywhere. What firefighters would do is they would create sort of like a fire line. They would go to a certain area ahead of the fire and basically clear everything of flammables. Like they would chop down trees and whatnot, or even set fires themselves in a controlled manner in order to burn out the flammable stuff. And so when the eventual fire reaches that point, it cannot go forward anymore because there's nothing for it to burn, right? And so thus the fire is contained. And so it's a sort of a similar situation here where in the past, if a house, for instance, there's a fire within a house, they would sort of destroy the area around it to make sure that the fire does not jump from house to house and then eventually spread out uncontrolled, right? So by destroying the houses around that fire, they would basically contain it. And so that's how they showed it here. Sort of like a homage to tradition, if you will, because they are based on this sort of traditional firefighting force, so they're using these kinds of traditional firefighting techniques, right? And the thing I love about this is, even though within the episode I was thinking like, hey, this is a little bit too over the top, right? Like, is there really a necessity to do something as heavy-handed as this? But it actually ties in with the entire morale of this episode of all, the moral of the story, I mean, not morale, the moral of the story. So if we go back to the past of the 8th and what the lieutenant and the captain were talking about, right? They were talking about, so for example, the lieutenant himself is a self-proclaimed atheist, right? He doesn't believe in soul. And the captain, not really sure, but I reckon that maybe he doesn't really care if the soul exists or not. I guess he's most probably indifferent to it, but they still, say their prayers and whatnot, and they want to kill the Infernals using a baptized gun in the case of the lieutenant, right? They still want to do something to sort of like soothe the people there. It's a symbolic gesture, indeed, but still, to them, it's sort of like allowing these people to die with dignity and with respect, with honor, right? And so that's, even though it is symbolic in nature, they believe that this is something that should be done in order to respect these people, these normal people who have been turned into Infernos. And so that entire concept also follows over here to the way that Benimaru does things as well, right? So somebody in this area turned into an Inferno, well, he's going to honor this with using the traditional firefighting techniques, right? Even though this Inferno didn't really, he basically held on, right? He was not going around and destroying stuff or anything. But Benimaru decided to treat him as they would treat fires in the past, and use this concept of destroying the buildings around him, the Hakai Shoka, to, it's tradition, right? But it's their way of paying respect to this person, treating them as a fire. It sounds kind of silly in a sense, but at the same time, I can kind of see where they're going with this. And it's, so basically they're saying like, saying a prayer and using this type of firefighting method is in essence the same, right? It's all about respecting these people who have turned into Infernos. Now, does that mean that this is, I don't think this is still too heavy-handed? I honestly still think it's too heavy-handed, right? There's still quite a little bit of difference between actually saying a prayer and destroying like dozens of buildings just to honor a single Inferno, right? But I guess if the people themselves don't really care about this and they're not complaining about it, then who am I to complain about, right? So I did like how there was this sort of reinforcement of ideals between the story that we saw with the 8th and how they are portraying the captain of the 7, right? So I did like this part as well. And of course, his abilities, awesome, right? And he's honestly, all the people who fight in this anime, they managed to make them look super cool. But in this case, you gotta give extra coolness points to Benimaru here, right? And like being able to create fire by herself and then also manipulate it, like that is OP, isn't it? Although to a certain extent, that also raises some questions I have about the about third generations, right? So third generations, they can create fire from within them, but does that actually mean that they can't really control these fires that well? And so that's why having the abilities of both the second and the third generation allows Benimaru to control the fires to a higher degree than the other fire soldiers, than those of the third generation? Or is it just simply stating that as, a fact, right? And the only difference is that Benimaru can also control other people's fires, and not just his own as well. Because what we saw there was basically, you would think that a third generation would be able to do something similar to this, right? In fact, thinking about it, the lieutenant can do something similar to it, right? He's creating all these fires. Well, actually, hold that thought. He's a second generation, right? So he's actually controlling, the fires from all the firearms and bullets and whatnot. So he's second generation. So does that mean that third generation are not able to do something like that? I feel like they should be able to, though. Like, allowing their fire to manifest onto an object and then controlling the fire on that object. I don't know. I guess we're arguing semantics at that point. But like I said, I did like this episode a lot. Both, in lots of different areas. In the historical references, in the in the way that they treat the story and how there's a central theme throughout the story. The pacing was nice, the character development was nice, the animation scenes were cool, and overall, good episode. I definitely liked it a lot more than any of the episodes from the previous arc, I'll tell you guys that. And so, yeah, anyways, so I guess next episode we're going to be continue on with investigating, or I shouldn't say investigating the seventh, but I guess exploring the jurisdiction of the seventh. And I guess with what Shinra saw this episode, I guess he's not going to be going off and challenging Benimaru again. He probably has a lot more respect for him now in terms of how he does things or whatnot, but hey, it could still happen, I guess. So, anyways, that's my review for episode 11 of Fire Force. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and hopefully you guys have learned something as well. I certainly did. I'm not going to go ahead and pretend that I knew about all these firefighting stuff from the Edo period of Japan, but I guess there's enough information for me to go on to say, okay, so that's probably what they're referring to, right? And yeah, it's cool. I learned something as well, and hopefully you guys have as well. So, I'll see you guys next week. See you then. Bye-bye.